Good afternoon. My name is Mercedes Madrid Lowry, and I am the Clinical Behavioral Health Specialist at the Georgia Rural Health Innovation Center of Mercer School of Medicine. And I'm going to introduce Mr. Thomas Forsyth. He prosecutes drug trafficking crimes and other federal offenses. He currently serves as the district's criminal opioid coordinator. Forsyth attended Brigham Young University and then UC Hastings School of Law before joining the Maricopa County Attorney's Office in Phoenix, Arizona. After 10 years as a county prosecutor, Forsyth joined the U.S. Attorney's Office in Phoenix, where he focused mainly on drug trafficking and overdose deaths in his role as an opioid coordinator for Arizona. After 4 years in that office, Forsyth transferred to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Atlanta.
All right, good afternoon. Let's get my massive face off the screen there. Is there a mobile mic I can grab?
All right, I'm going to roam around a little bit. I'm a trial attorney, and I just need to kind of get my brain going. First of all, I want to say, this morning as I was driving in, I was thinking about how honored I felt to be asked to speak here. And now I feel, after having sat through this conference, I feel even more honored to have been part of this. This has been a fantastic conference, fantastic speakers. I've learned a lot. It's been so great to have different perspectives, so I really appreciate what we've done here. So I'm going to talk to you about what we're seeing on the federal level, I guess kind of 30,000 view with fentanyl in the state and maybe a little bit more drugs as well. So I am an assistant U.S. attorney, which means I'm a federal prosecutor. I work for the U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. There's 92 or 93 federal districts in the country. There's 3 in Georgia. I'm now in somebody else's turf. I'm in the Middle District's turf, so I better watch my back. But Northern District is essentially Atlanta, and then we cover 46 counties north of that. And there's a map in these slides that'll kind of show you a little better. I will tell you, so as you heard in the introduction, I've been a prosecutor for about 17 years now. I've done all different crimes, but mostly drug trafficking crimes. I enjoy them, and I kind of blame my dad from when I was a kid watching Miami Vice. Maybe, but I enjoy them, and part of it is because I grew up in Northern California, Humboldt County, which is part of what we call the Emerald Triangle, which they estimated. I saw a program on A&E years ago called Pot City, USA, in my hometown, Arcata, California. They estimated that 1 in every 100 homes was a grow house because of the very liberal, I'm trying not to use it politically, but liberal laws with personal use of marijuana. You could grow up to 100 plants and say it was personal use. So the intro to that house was a execution of a search warrant on a grow house, and it happened to be my grandma's old house. So I'm passionate about, because I've seen how illicit drugs destroy communities. And I also have addiction in my own family, my wife's family, and I've seen on a personal level how it impacts and ripples through and really impacts people. And probably most importantly, the reason I'm passionate about this, I'm a father of 4 kids. As of Monday, I've got one in college, high school, middle, and elementary. And this, I will say, terrifies me. Fentanyl terrifies me, not just for my own kids, but for their friends and my neighbors. So I am passionate about this. I imagine that will come out, but I love this. I am an employee of the Department of Justice. I am not representing the Department of Justice officially in terms of, I don't have anything to do with budget. I don't have anything to do with funding of any kind, so I can't answer any kind of questions about that. These thoughts are my own officially, but so we'll go ahead and get started. So I am going to, I'll give a shout out, Donovan. I love, where'd Donovan go? Did I lose him? He stepped out. Okay. I love DPH's data. I'm a data nerd, just like Attorney General Carr. I was a business major in college now with a law degree. So I like the numbers and I like pictures because I'm not the brightest bulb in the box. So I love the data that they have. So as we all know, and thankfully this number is getting better, but in 2023, we had a lot of people who lost their lives to drug poisoning and overdose. And in some of these, we can kind of see the trend here. This is from the CDC Suitors database. We can see that we are seeing improvements in overdose deaths by drugs and drug class, but it's still too many lives are being lost. So when he comes back, I'm so proud that I want to show off to Donovan all his maps that I'm using. But you can see that, when we look at per capita rates, right? When you look at the numbers, your metro areas are always going to be the highest. But when you look at per capita rates, that's really where you see where the issues are. And I think especially when we look at ER and inpatient visits, right, as opposed to deaths, that's where we really get a sense of what's happening on the ground. Who's showing up at the hospitals? What's kind of the bigger usage issues? So I'll just show this. This is fentanyl specific. So you can see just like the prescribing trends down in the southern part of the state, you can kind of see some of those darker colors there when it comes to death rates with fentanyl. So there's those. We'll skip through these. Now, we all have seen faces of fentanyl, but what really impacts me is to think that each and every one of these people and everyone that loses their life, it's not just them, right? They are someone's child, someone's brother, someone's parent, someone's cousin, and it is a ripple effect through our communities. I know, COVID was rough on kids, but I think that even, the trauma that they experience with losing someone close to them, that trauma, it plays out in school, it plays out in all kinds of relationships and mental health. And so this is the public health and public safety issue of our day. I'm probably getting too far for this remote. So, all right, so let's talk about the business of drugs. And I personally find this really interesting as a business major in college. That's what this really is at the end of the day. Drug trafficking is a business. And just like any business, you've got all the parts of a company. You've got to take care of revenue. You've got customers. You've got suppliers. You've got logistics. You've got all these things. And just like any business kind of has a territory that it covers, and this example is supermarkets regionally, we also have Mexican drug cartels that operate and control certain areas. And the whole point of that is they control the area so they can get the product into areas. And sadly, in Mexico, the violence that comes along with that is shocking, absolutely shocking. I don't know how it hasn't spilled into the US. I think it's because they realize that that's just not going to be tolerated. But the violence is really, really astounding. So just like any business has its products, a drug cartel's products are controlled substances. And the main ones, obviously, are methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, marijuana, and fentanyl. Now, what we're seeing, as you probably know, is that fentanyl is now being mixed in pretty much every other controlled substance. Marijuana, you hear sometimes, fentanyl laced with, or marijuana laced with fentanyl. I've heard one law enforcement officer say he came into contact with it. I don't know if that was just trace amounts from something else, but I've not heard anyone say that this is a real issue. So, again, as a business, the drugs are the product, and it's all about money and guns. It's about guns because they have value and because they can't obtain guns in Mexico as easily. And so oftentimes firearms are sent back to Mexico as payment. And I'll tell you, I just finished a jury trial this last week for it was a liquid methamphetamine conversion lab, and they had a 50 caliber rifle that was packaged, ready, apparently to look like it was going to be shipped back to Mexico. If you're not familiar with firearms, 50 caliber firearm, the rounds about as tall as my hand, about 5.5 inches, They are designed, they will take out an engine block of a car, they will take down an airplane or a helicopter, and they will blow through any armor that anyone could wear. So that's what the whole goal is. So these cartels have, almost 2,000 miles of border to work with to get the product through, and then water as well, the coastline as well. So again, the goal in general, the drugs come north, money and guns go south, and that's what we typically see. Now, they're coming through things like, places like the ports of entry where you just have massive amounts of traffic that Border Patrol is trying to check. And every one of these cars is potentially loaded with drugs. And you see, I worked down on the Arizona in Phoenix, but we covered Yuma, Arizona, and the San Luis port of entry. And these are the kinds of cases that we would see. You'd have cars that were just filled with dope. So they'll hide them in tires, they'll hide them in gas tanks, they'll hide it in any way you can imagine. It's actually impressively creative. You'll have body-worn, you'll have couriers who will walk through the port of entry with drugs attached to their bodies under their clothes in the hopes that they'll get through. And it's really a numbers game because, okay, maybe one car gets stopped and seized, but then there's 3 other cars that made it through because they were tied up doing that. Same thing with people. The drugs are getting secreted into things like cover loads of fruit and vegetables. This was a load of celery, 3,200 pounds of methamphetamine seized from the farmer's market just by the airport up in Atlanta a couple months ago. So it's coming through tunnels, they'll use drones over the border, they'll use cargo ships. Phones is a big thing, encrypted applications. We run into that all the time. I work daily with FBI, DEA, Homeland Security investigations to investigate these drug traffickers, and our efforts are stymied because they are smart and they are using encrypted applications to communicate, and we can't get access to them, so they're able to operate freely. Compartmentalization, as we call it, is a big part of this game, and that is one, there are multiple sections to we'll call it the supply chain, and one doesn't know what the other's doing. It's controlled by one person or one group, but they don't know what the others are doing, and that's to insulate themselves, especially the higher ups. So again, it's a business, and it's all about the guns and money, and quite frankly, it's pure capitalism. I mean, it is unchecked, amoral, unethical, just pure capitalism. It doesn't care about anything but the money. So because it's a business, I think of it in terms of supply and demand, right? You've got a supply side, and as you remember from whenever you took economics, right? It's price, quantity, supply and demand, it all works together. So when we talk about the supply side, we're talking about the products like methamphetamine. I just found this in the DEA's, the National Drug Trafficking Assessment from 2025. This is for methamphetamine. You'll notice that Georgia is a standout when it comes to methamphetamine. What's really interesting is to see it's the Loop 285, the perimeter, that is where these stops are being made, these seizures are being made. It's not too surprising though, based on what I've seen. This is actually a photo from the trial I just did. This was the liquid methamphetamine conversion lab that they had inside of a residence. It was a fourplex, and it was full. They were mixing, the liquid methamphetamine was mixed into paint, and they had a whole process to extract it from the paint and then turn it and then crystallize it. So it involved acetone, it involved propane and burners, big pots. They would use a drill to mix it up. And this same group we seized earlier than this house, we seized from another location 135 kilograms of liquid methamphetamine paint mixture. So methamphetamine is a real issue, especially in Atlanta and in Georgia altogether. Cocaine is another one of the products of the supply, and fentanyl while we're here. Fentanyl is great, right? This kind of fentanyl, the fentanyl that's used in a hospital in very small doses. I had during the Super Bowl, my gallbladder quit on me completely, and I was in the worst pain I'd ever felt, and I had to get it removed, and thank goodness I got fentanyl. It was great because I needed it medically. But the problem is we've got people who, this small amount, we've got people who are sending fentanyl, not in medical grade amounts and qualities, but they're sending it, and these are real pictures from a Vice video journalist report of guys mixing up fentanyl to make the paste, to press the pills, to send into the United States. So where you're talking about 2 milligrams is a potentially lethal dose, and you're using micrograms in the hospital with an anesthesiologist who's gone through years of training and knows what they're doing. You've got these guys out in the desert, and they're using sticks and buckets. So this is part of the problem. All right, now this is something that is troubling to me, and this is a picture of a seizure from Gwinnett County it was earlier this year. These purple bricks are kilogram bricks of fentanyl powder. And this, the stamps on them, we've heard different things from different intel sources about what the colors mean, what who's using what stamps. But this purple Louis Vuitton is like the hot item when you're talking about drug trafficking. So hot that this song was actually released, Purple Louis V, by an Atlanta rapper just this year. Well, I guess our sound's off. I had the song ready to go for you in case you wanted to listen to it. But it's despicable to me that we have individuals who are trying to bring this in. They are bringing this into the mainstream and trying to make it acceptable. They're trying to make it cool. They're trying to make it, plausible or attractive to people. So sorry you're missing out on the song. A lot of times those bricks will get, pieces will break off, and they'll sell them in these smaller amounts than kilo size. And a lot of times they will find xylazine inside mixed in these bricks of fentanyl. The scary thing about xylazine, as you likely know, is that Narcan does nothing for it because it's not an opioid. So it's an additional public safety risk. All right, I want to talk about something that came, even though I've been doing drug trafficking cases for years, it wasn't until last year that really the massive scale of local pill pressing came to my attention, and we have done a significant amount of law enforcement action to address it. So if we could play the video. So this is a CBS report from last year. So Ann Milgram is no longer the DEA advisor, or administrator, but it's still good info, valid, up-to-date info. Well, I guess the video, only the audio copied over. So, but basically, as you can see from this, these are pill presses, industrial pill presses that you can purchase, anybody can purchase online. They will churn out some hundreds per hour, some thousands of pills per hour. And the way that they work is, at least these, you've got this funnel, and they will put in a binding agent that you can purchase online. And sometimes it'll be like caffeine powder. Sometimes it's this stuff called Firmapress, which one particular company sells. There's all kinds of different chemicals that'll make up these binding agents. And then they put a little bit of fentanyl or methamphetamine or whatever, and then they use a die and a punch, which has like the shape of the pill and the stamp, and they can make a pill into any shape, any color. Even pharmacists look to make it look like a pharmaceutical pill. All right, so this is from the website of LFA Machines. This is their selection of pill presses that are available to the public from anywhere, I think the lowest I saw was $6,000 up to well over $100,000, and you can finance these through the company. So the financial barrier to entry in this is very low. There are these pill presses, these are the big boys, but these are the tabletop ones. Like I said, I've been doing this for a while. I've been shocked at the number of pill presses that are in Georgia. that are in people's houses, that are in barns off of Airbnbs, that are in rented warehouses. We pulled 22 pill presses out of one warehouse last year. It is shocking, and it is a domestic, essentially it's a cartel level production domestically. And I'm working actively with FBI and DEA. We are trying to find these pill presses and just get them off the street. That's our main objective. So you end up getting, just batches and batches of pills. And like I said, and they can press them into any shape, make it look like Xanax, make it look like oxycodone. And most DEA agents even will say, I can't tell you by looking at it if it's real or not. I don't know. And the problem is you get the fentanyl because it's not mixed up like a pharmacy would do it, or a pharmaceutical company. This portion might have a bunch of fentanyl, this portion might just have filler. And so somebody may use half a pill and it still kills them because there's too much in there. And I think like Attorney General Carr mentioned, it really is like Russian roulette, using any substance, not just pills, but any substance, because everything is getting mixed with fentanyl these days on the street. So again, it's a business, and on the demand side, we know what the demand is in Georgia. We know from who's showing up at the hospitals. So when you think about those two, the way we address those, right on the supply side, that's a law enforcement issue, and that's what my day job is to try to work with law enforcement, and let's just get as much of this stuff off the street as we can. On the demand side, right, the way you address demand is through prevention and treatment, which is what this conference and what you all do, the great work that you all do. Enforcement, I don't have a lot of resources with prevention and treatment. I dabble a little bit, and I support everything that you all do, because you all do great work, and I am so appreciative of that, because I've learned that over my career that, because as long as there's money to be made, someone's just gonna pop back up and make the money. So there's no way, we can't arrest our way out of the use side of it, the demand side of it, and a lot of ways we can't arrest ourselves out of the supply side of it. And really what it comes down to is, until demand goes down, that we're just gonna keep having the supply. So you can see on the enforcement side, you can see the fentanyl seizures. This is DEA's 2024. The amounts of fentanyl that are seized along the southwest border, it's staggering. And then the number of pills that DEA seized so far, 33 million pills so far, over 6,800 pounds of fentanyl. So Georgia, I have to say, as a state, Georgia's doing really well in terms of the laws to address this. So this is Austin's law, and it was passed earlier this year, and you'll see in a minute, federally to prosecute someone for selling drugs that kill someone is difficult. The state of Georgia, it's a lot easier now to prosecute the person, because instead of it having to be like the cause of death, if fentanyl was a contributing cause of death, then that person, the seller, can be prosecuted. And the same thing with the Fentanyl Eradication Act. Now, there is a mandatory minimum of 25 years for 28 grams or more. Now, I will say that's a lot of time, and I hope, personally, as a prosecutor, I hope that prosecutors are using their discretion and not sending people with relatively smaller amounts of fentanyl than I typically see to prison for 25 years. But it gives law enforcement an opportunity, leverage, to be able to really focus in on the people who are causing the most harm by trafficking fentanyl, and try to take them out of the situation. So, like I said, these are the 46 counties of the Northern District of Georgia, and what we did when our last U.S. attorney came into office, he did kind of a tour of the district, and he asked everyone, like, what's the main problem you're seeing? What can we do as the federal government to help? He said across the board, fentanyl was the issue. Fentanyl and drug overdoses. So what he asked, we put together a small working group, and we used DPH's data to see, outside just the metro area where the numbers are high, where's the issue most acute? And so we looked at overdose death rates per capita, the hospital visitation rates per capita. We looked at prescription rates per capita, and we considered the law enforcement partners that we had in those areas. And we came down to the 4 counties of Bartow, Polk, Haralson, and Carroll counties. And they just happened to be contiguous. That was not intentional. This is just how the data rolled out. And so what we did is we started a strategic initiative, which is through a program called OCDF, the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force, and we got funding to work with these state and local partners. And we said, okay, we are going to identify the individuals in these counties and their surrounding areas, the individuals in those counties who are having the most negative impact in dealing. Basically, we're going after the worst dealers in those areas. And so that's what we did. And we ended up arresting individuals, doing undercover buys from individuals. We ended up arresting them, prosecuting them, went to prison. And then what we knew was going to happen is that because, the drugs are coming from Atlanta, we were then able to move back toward Atlanta, toward the source, and start getting their suppliers and start going after the individuals that were doing the larger amounts and supplying these more outlying areas. And we've had a lot of success, and it's been a great partnership and a great deal. All right, I'm looking at my time. All right, so I want to just go briefly through with you, just on a federal level, what it takes to prosecute a federal drug trafficking case. So the United States Code, Section 841, basically it's illegal and unlawful to manufacture, distribute, dispense, or possess with intent to manufacture, distribute, or dispense a controlled substance. And then there's a whole section of penalties and weights. So when I'm when I go to trial, and this is what I just did this week, the government has to prove with evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant, the person charged, possessed, knowingly or intentionally, possessed or distributed to another person a particular controlled substance. So there's a distribution count, there's a charge, and then there's also a possession with intent to distribute it to another person. So obviously for any arrest, we have to establish that there's probable cause to arrest the person for that specific crime. For us to indict someone, we have to have evidence that and believe there's a reasonable likelihood of conviction on that specific count. And then we have to prove their guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, whether that's they plead guilty in a plea agreement or we prove it to a jury at trial. So one thing that has really been fulfilling for me here and in Arizona is investigating and prosecuting overdose death cases. And in my previous job, I had investigated and prosecuted some homicide cases, and I enjoyed drug trafficking cases, and these are kind of a merge of those two. But what's really unique about them are all the other issues, a lot of the stuff that we've talked about today, a lot of the other issues that come into play just on a personal level with families and individuals. So when I say Georgia's got really good laws for prosecuting drug overdose deaths, federally, if someone is found guilty of distribution resulting in death or serious physical injury, it's a mandatory minimum of 20 years. Now, as you'll see in a minute, it's actually really difficult, and the stars kind of have to align for us to be able to do that. So it's been really helpful for state prosecutors in Georgia to be able to address this issue on their own. So to be able to prove those cases, we have to show with proof beyond a reasonable doubt each of these elements, as we call them. So the really difficult thing in a lot of these cases is that the drug that the defendant distributed or sold has to be a but-for cause of the death. Now that gets really complicated when you're talking about multiple substances, because we have to be able to show, did this person sell the decedent both or all three of those substances, and if not, which of the substances caused the death, and is that the one that they sold? Now, I'm dealing with this, an issue with this right now, because xylazine has really complicated things because xylazine is not illegal. So xylazine will kill someone, but it's not illegal. And so I have a case that involves fentanyl and xylazine, which is called Trank, and it's unclear, was it the fentanyl or was it the xylazine? And if I can't prove that it was the fentanyl, I can't prove that it was distribution resulting in death of a controlled substance. So there's a lot of challenges to these. So we look at things like the medical examiner reports to see what the cause of death was. Here are some examples. You'll see a lot of them, the combined effects of ethanol and fentanyl, cocaine use, alprazolam and THC, all these different substances, and it's pretty rare for us to see just a straight, death caused by a straight fentanyl toxicity. So the way that these cases roll out is that someone overdoses or is poisoned and passes, and then either local law enforcement or DEA then investigates the death. Now, if they can identify a dealer, that's where it kicks off. First, you got to be able to say who sold the drugs. We then wait for the medical examiner's report to see what was the cause of death, what were the substances. And then if the dealer's drugs were the but-for cause of death, then we can file the charge distribution resulting in death, the one that carries the 20-year mandatory minimum. If they were not the but-for cause of death, then we have some other ways we can do it. There could be a state charge, there could be some other things that we do to try to get a just sentence in the case. If we can't identify the dealer, there's no prosecution because we can't charge anyone. So, and I did not intend for a bald one to be in this. This movie's great, and I thought it worked well for the point. But a lot of times we'll find, when we get a decedent's phone, we'll see that they have obtained drugs from multiple different sources. And so we have to be able to identify who is the individual that sold them the drugs that took their life. And so, we might have all kinds of other dealers, but we've got to really lock in onto who it was. And then we have to not only prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it was this guy, but really disprove that it was all these other potential dealers. So a lot of times we'll have to kind of recreate the last 24 hours of the decedent's life to really be able to rule out other sources of these drugs. So again, we have to connect the drugs to the individual, and again, the phones are really critical. So it's going to be the decedent's phone. Once we kind of figure out, hey, this is the last person they talked to about buying drugs from somebody, we'll try to get a hold of information from the suspected dealer's phone, and kind of work backwards. So I give law enforcement kind of a rough checklist of the things that we try to gather. We're going to try, again, to recreate those last 24 hours, talking to family and friends, getting, Google account and Apple iCloud information. We're going to look at medical examiner's report. We're going to look at the dealer's stuff. We'll get historical cell site data to try to, put people in a specific location at a specific time. A device at a specific location at a specific time. And again, corroborate that with things like video surveillance from convenience stores and banks and other things. And as we discussed in the PDMP records are also an important part of this so that we can, really hone in on what the substance was. So we'll try to, do things like figure out locations. Here's just a good example. Somebody maybe made a deposit at the bank right after in a certain area. All right, so sometimes what we'll do if to kind of corroborate that a suspect is the one who sold the drugs, we'll have an undercover agent pose as the person, if it's possible, pose as the person, the decedent, and buy more drugs from them. And a lot of times it will be the same or similar drugs that they sold that took the person's life. All right, so as we talk about a business again, like I said, it's really just, it's whack-a-mole. So, we might get one person who's, moving kilos and kilos of methamphetamine and they're gone, but somebody wants to make money, and so somebody else pops up and they just take over what they're doing. So when we talk about prevention and treatment, the goal really with that is to lower the demand, to lower the price of drugs, because if the cartel's not making money, they're going to quit sending the stuff over. So in my opinion, that really is the ultimate key to this whole thing. Now, it's one of those things where you all have the ideas and the creativity of how to do this, how to deal with the prevention and treatment aspect of it, because it's more nuanced, I think, every day I realize how more and more nuanced it really is, and it's an individual issue. So, there are things like Operation Prevention to educate parents and teachers, just public service announcements, educating people about things. Sorry, this clicker is just not loving me today. One of the big things that anytime I speak to parents, I tell every parent, if you own that phone, you are entitled to look at every single thing inside that phone, and they should, because there is so much that's going on social media, so many drugs that are being sold on Snapchat, on Facebook. I kind of thought Facebook now was just for like really old people, but a lot of people are selling drugs on Facebook, shockingly. So that's a big deal. Every time I pull this up for parents, every phone comes out wanting to take a picture of it. But these are some of the emojis that we'll find in phones that people will use to communicate about different substances. So what I often tell parents is, hey, if you find a text in your kid's phone and it doesn't make sense, then you probably should be asking questions about what's going on here. Because these aren't the only, right? I mean, these are just examples of ones that are used. All right, so I worked with Katie Freand, who Donovan mentioned, with overdose response. And she and I put together with DPH really did it, but we kind of had the idea of a flyer with the signs of an overdose, and I'll show you why. So this is from the CDC Suitors website. Database, and there was some other data that I pulled, and it was 2023. So there are 38 or 39 states that report into this. Of those states, Georgia was number one in the percentage of overdose deaths in which the drug that led to the fatal overdose was witnessed by another person. Number two among those, where there was, with no bystander, where there was a bystander but no response by the bystander because they didn't recognize abnormalities as an overdose. And top five, in which there was no pulse when the first responder arrived, which to me suggests nobody did anything, nobody called 911, even though they may have been present, and that person died probably unnecessarily. So we thought, let's, if that's an issue in Georgia, let's put together some kind of flyer to try to educate folks. Hey, this is what the signs of an overdose look like. And also, what do you do? So we've all now got Narcan. So that's the first thing to do. Make sure they call 911, keep them breathing and wait for a response in the rescue position. And then a big thing that we heard was that there are a lot of people who are still scared to call 911 despite Georgia's Good Samaritan or medical amnesty law. We heard anecdotally that there are people who are in using, and they're still scared because they've heard I heard my buddy got arrested when they called. So the idea of, hey, let's please just call 911. Just call 911 and help and get first responders there. So other ideas, right? We talked about advocacy. Jeff talked about talking to, your local city councils. You can talk to chambers of commerce. I heard a really interesting presentation a while ago, and it's a group, and I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but he goes and talks to businesses and talks to managers and the owners of companies about issues within the workplace, because there is a real serious issue, especially in more manual labor jobs, a real issue with substance abuse. So there's helping people get treatment. It may be that encouraging police to get out on the street and be proactive about helping people get into treatment. People who are coming out of incarceration, their tolerance levels are much lower than they were before they went in. So there's definitely a concern that individuals who are coming out just expect, I can use the same amount that I used when I went in, but it's not the case. Peer groups and all the other great groups. Drug courts are another great tool in the toolbox to help individuals to get treatment with accountability hanging over their heads. And there are a lot of counties in the state that have really great programs. Medical assisted treatment, even in jails, naloxone and Narcan handouts, and prescription drug disposal. So these are all the things that, tools in the toolbox, which you all know. And I will say, I echo what Attorney General Carr said this morning about siloing. This state Georgia is fantastic, and I'm not disparaging Arizona at all, but the amount of collaboration that occurs in this space in Georgia is fantastic. It has been great to see, and this kind of venue is, to me, it's fantastic. It's so great to see people coming together, networking, sharing ideas, getting to know each other, really joining resources, because, everybody's trying to do good and trying to do a lot of the same thing. So let's put our resources together and work together. It's about educating and advocating and really uniting together to take out this, address this problem that it's not going to go away soon. As I heard someone say, we don't have so much of a substance abuse problem in this country as we have a happiness problem. And I think that's true. And I think that as long as we've got unaddressed mental health issues and we've got, lack of connection with each other, there's gonna be an issue with addiction in some way or another. So coming together and working on this is so critical. Any thoughts, or I'm trying not to take up too much time from Commissioner Tanner and get you out the door. So, but any questions I can answer? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, so the question is, when we're trying to identify a dealer who has sold a fatal dose of drugs and they're not using their real names and real phones and all that, what do we do? Yeah, so sometimes we will use, with probable cause, we can get a warrant to get a tracker to trace the geolocation of a device. And so we'll have that number. The radius on what they call pings is kind of broad. So it's a lot of different kind of like thinking outside the box kind of stuff sometimes, because it's a burner phone or it's the subscriber's Mickey Mouse so it just depends on the facts. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
How do you determine whether you prosecute one of these drug trafficking crimes as a state crime or a federal crime? That's a great question. And it depends. Those are conversations that we have probably weekly. So federal agencies have the option to take a case to the state. And so a lot of it, we kind of have some guidelines in our office of like weights of drugs that we say, okay, hey, this is just because, my office is we're down like 40% in staff. So we're really trying to conserve resources. I'm a huge fan, having been a county prosecutor, I'm a huge fan of if the county can handle it, they should handle it. And we'll support whatever, but it just depends on kind of like the amounts. If there's guns involved or it's somebody who's been through the federal system before and they're just not getting it, then we'll that has a federal flavor to it, or aroma, as we say. So, yeah, but it's a little subjective on that. I will say, a lot of the time, the state sentences are even worse than, kind of some of the draconian federal sentences. So, but it just all depends. Yes, ma'am.
I've worked with several patients that's been incarcerated and got out of prison. And their stories with how much drugs they could get in prison sort of scares me.
Yeah.
With, sending them to prison, but yet in prison, this one guy told me he paid for his first home.
Yeah. Yeah. I have heard more than one person say, we send people to prison and they come out better drug dealers. Attorney General Carr mentioned it this morning about laws and jamming cell phone signals in prisons. This is just my
my opinion, not federal government. I don't know why we haven't been doing that the whole time. I mean, I've got investigations right now with prison brokers, and it's crazy. It's unreal. So, yeah, it's a real problem, and it needs to be addressed, 100%. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I know before you were showing something about MAT treatment and jails.
Yes, sir.
I know, or at least to my knowledge, here in Bibb County, they do not offer that. And I work for a MAT facility, and if we have something happen and one of our patients gets locked up, that's not an option for them. I know there's several counties that do it around here, but that is not something that they have specifically for Bibb County.
Yeah, and I think that's very common throughout the state. Now, my understanding, another colleague in my office deals with this, my understanding is that the Americans with Disabilities Act requires a jail to provide medically assisted treatment if the incarcerated person was already receiving it before they came into the jail. Now, I know that also is not always happening, and so there's some enforcement issues which the U.S. Attorney's offices are part of. I think it would be fantastic. Jeff stepped out, or he's back there. Jeff and I were just having this conversation. I was asking him, I don't understand why we aren't providing medically assisted treatment to every single person that's incarcerated that wants it. I mean, most property crimes you can trace back to some kind of substance abuse. Violent crimes, a lot of those crimes. It is literally a captive audience. Why are we not taking advantage of that time at a time where people are probably in a better space to say, yeah, I need to make some changes. So, yeah, I 100% agree with you. All right, any other questions I can answer? Yes, ma'am.
I'm just really curious how we're going to handle this with Mexico and them not really caring, from what I'm understanding, because when I worked with the disability movement, we had a problem because they didn't care. They didn't even provide wheelchairs. They just let the people drag around on the ground, and we tried to do an international event to bring awareness, and there was just such a lack of caring. So I'm just wondering, how are you dealing with that with Mexico and the border? Is there any hope?
That is well above my pay grade. But from what I have seen, it looks like there's economic pinch points that are trying to be employed. It's a problem, and I won't say that there aren't people that care in Mexico, because I think there are. I'm confident there are probably a lot of people that care.
Yeah.
There is a lot of corruption in the government in Mexico and Central America, and from what I can tell, that seems to be the biggest issue. But that's a Mexico problem that we can't fix their corruption within local politics. And you've also got not just corruption, but you've got drug cartels that basically given the same ultimatum, you want silver or lead, and you'll see mayors and police chiefs assassinated. I mean, it's probably every once a month there's some politician or police chief that gets assassinated, and the suspicion is usually because they weren't cooperating with the drug cartels. So it is not. I mean, we can't fix Mexico. That's it's a sovereign state. They have their own issues. But again, I personally think if we can bring down demand, there's no reason they'll go find something else to make money. Some other illegal way to make money. Hopefully, it's not killing Americans.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions I can answer before I hand it off? All right. Well, thank you very much for your attention. Again, it's great to be here.